what is your thoughts to the resurgence of Aaron Jones, a young running back that really came out of nowhere and really has produced for Aaron Rodgers? This is a team that really has not had a good running game since Aaron Rodgers taken over. I know they had Eddie Lacy and Starks, but none of these guys were anywhere explosive like Aaron Jones. What do you think about Aaron Jones, especially this year with 16 touchdowns and 1,100 yards? I almost said that, 1,100 yards.
Right. And he scored 19 combined touchdowns, running and receiving. Mm-hmm. So I think the whole thing with the running game is when Mike McCarthy was there, the emphasis was on the passing game. They've never really made a commitment to the run. I mean, you'd watch those games and, in situations where it was 3rd and 3, 3rd and 4, they would never run the ball. It was always, let's line up 3 or 4 receivers and let's try to throw it all over the field. So now that LaFleur is there coaching the team, the emphasis, the mentality, the philosophy has changed. And so I think that goes into Aaron Jones emerging last year, and he's going to continue being the main man. Now, what they've done now in drafting A.J. Dillon in the 2nd round is now they're fortifying that running game, and I think he's going to be an upgrade over Jamal Williams, who is a good blocker, but he's got like zero juice to him. He's just one of those types of guys that, you create 3 yards, he'll get you 3 yards, maybe he'll get you 4 yards, but there's not a lot of upside with Jamal Williams. So I think Aaron Jones is going to continue being the number 1 guy, but he's going to be a free agent, and so is Jamal Williams at the end of the season. So it remains to be seen. I'm hoping that the Packers find a way to re-sign Aaron Jones, but as we've seen with a lot of other running backs in the NFL, when they sign these running backs to big contracts, it doesn't always work out.
We are talking to NFL writer for the Green Bay Packers, Ralph Mancini.
You were talking about Dillon, drafting him in the 2nd round, and obviously with the year Jones has, he's not going to really take over as a feature back. What kind of role do you see him in? Will this, you think, allow them to line up Jones as receiver? Do you think they'll use some 2-back sets? What do you think will be the outlook for A.J. Dillon in terms of the amount of touches he'll get and the role he'll be used in LaFleur's offense?
I think initially, if everybody stays healthy, I think they're going to start off going with a 3-man backfield, or I should say a 3-man rotation with Jones, Jamal Williams, and A.J. Dillon splitting time. But I do think that, as A.J. Dillon picks up the offense, as he becomes more comfortable with the pro game, I think he's eventually going to transition into being that number 2 back. And then a lot of it is also going to depend on, what the game flow is going to be. So if the Packers happen to be nursing a 20-point lead in the 4th quarter, against, let's say the Vikings or whoever in week 10 or whatever, then A.J. Dillon's going to see the ball late in the game because he's that 4-minute type of back that's just going to run the clock. So I do think as the season wears on, I think he's going to assume a bigger role. I think he's going to be the number 2 guy, and I think he's going to supplant Jamal Williams as the RB2 in that offense.
Moving to the defense, and the defense really stepped up this year, adding the 2 Smith guys from Baltimore, Zadarius, who showed everybody what he could do in a big game, getting to the quarterback. Both guys were blitz happy guys that can get to the quarterback and played very, very well under that defense. What did you think about the defense this year taking a step forward instead of a step back?
Well, they did take a step forward in terms of rushing the passer. Zadarius Smith alone was a big difference maker. He led the league in pressures, 93 pressures. He led the NFL in that category. And if you watch them on a weekly basis, he's the type of guy who just is a nightmare for offensive lines to block. He lines up outside. He also gets a lot of sacks by lining up inside. He is a tone setter for that defense. So I do like what they did from that aspect in that, they did generate turnovers and they did get a lot of sacks. But what I didn't like is they are still deficient in terms of being a strong run defense. And that, hey, look, they don't have the best personnel in terms of defense, in terms of players in the NFL, but I also blame a lot of that on their defensive coordinator, Mike Pettine. So I think that, there's an emphasis on his part to focus on covering, or I should say neutralizing, the opposing passing game. and not so much the run. And I think that has gotten the Packers in trouble. I mean, you go back to that NFC Championship game, and the 49ers just ran all over them. You take a look at that game, I think the 49ers were up like 10-0 in the second quarter, and you see those pass rushers, those outside linebackers lining up in a wide nine and leaving the C gaps open. And I'm like, hey, look, I'm just a writer. I'm just a fan. And I'm like, what the heck is Mike Pettine doing out there? So, the safeties were playing back. I just think that there is a tendency on his part to want to prevent the big play and not really stop the run. The stopping the run is secondary to Mike Pettine, and that's a big concern for me. I do hope that they improve in that area, but that remains to be seen.
Moving on to just the draft in general, do you think the virtual draft contributed to the fact that there weren't a lot of big trades and there were no trades in the top 10 at all? Do you think the virtual draft had a lot to do with that, or do you think there were other reasons?
I could see that being a factor. The fact that they weren't able to work out a lot of these players, I just think that a lot of general managers didn't have all the knowledge that they wanted or needed on every single player. Now, you can give me numbers, you can give me combine numbers or measurables, but until I don't meet a person, work them out one-on-one, I'm just speaking as, putting myself in the shoes of a personnel director or GM or a coach. I'm not going to feel 100% comfortable with what this player can or cannot do. And especially when we're talking about kids from smaller schools. Hey, if you're talking about some kid, Jeffrey Okuda from Ohio State, yeah, he's on TV every week. So obviously that's somebody that you're going to feel more comfortable with as far as drafting. But if it's somebody from a mid-major or a smaller school, you do need a lot of times that personal contact interaction, if you will. And they just didn't have that this year. And yeah, I could see that being a contributing factor, to what you just spoke about as far as there not being a lot of trades this year.
We are talking to NFL writer for the Green Bay Packers, Ralph Mancini. Ralph, a lot of people have, gone back and forth with the Green Bay Packers draft. And they have been on the lower side of the draft this year. A lot of people voted them or have picked them to be one of the worst drafted teams this year, especially in the draft. They really didn't fill in spots that a lot of people thought they needed in the draft, aka the wide receiver position. What were your thoughts? Where did you grade the Packers this year in their draft?
I mean, I'm going to give them a C+. As in, let's see what happens. I mean, it's a lot of times, we won't know how good or how bad a draft class is going to be until 2 or 3 years down the road. But the way I look at it is a lot of times people look at individual players and they say, well, they could have drafted this guy in the 5th round and they took him in the 3rd round. What's going on? But sometimes you just have to step back and you take a larger view of the things and see, what were the Packers trying to do in this draft? And clearly the objective was to strengthen the running game. I mean, they took a big 250-pound back in Dillon as their 2nd round pick. In the 3rd round, they take a blocking tight end in Josiah DeGuara, who can line up as a fullback. Then they go on and take 3 offensive linemen in the later rounds. So that is the objective. That was the strategy. Now, if a year or two from now, this doesn't work out and they don't have a dominant running game, then you could definitely say this was an awful draft. But, right now I'm kind of on the fence. So I'm going to say C+, if you're going to put a gun to my head.
Better than a lot of people thought, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Ralph, just in the whole draft, do you think there were any picks that maybe the popular consensus liked that you thought was a bad pick or a bad fit for the team that drafted him in the 1st round, and why? Okay,
well, this is not going to be popular, but I'm going to say the Jalen Hurts pick kind of confused me. I mean, to me, when you have a young franchise quarterback in Carson Wentz, I understand he gets hurt a lot, but to take Jalen Hurts in the 2nd round, you're basically saying that if anything were to happen to Carson Wentz, this particular player is going to be able to step in and maybe not play as well as Wentz, but he's going to be somebody who's going to be able to take control and orchestrate and direct the offense. And Jalen Hurts is just not there yet. He's not ready. He's kind of like, Jordan Love from that aspect, and that he probably won't be ready for another 2 or 3 years. I mean, you're talking about, and I actually think, I like Love a lot better than Hurts, and obviously was drafted a lot later. But you take a look at a guy like Hurts, and he's just got a lot of work to do with his mechanics. And to me, he looks like a running back with an arm, as somebody once described him. So to take that type of player in the second round, a Taysom Hill type, just kind of confuses me a little bit. And I do understand there just weren't a lot of good quarterbacks in this draft. So I can understand what Harry Roseman was thinking. So that confused me a little bit.
Ralph, last question for me. And we've been going back and forth with fans and all different people. And I'm trying to compare Brett Favre to Aaron Rodgers, and who would I take in a big game or to win a title? And my answer to everybody is, I have a lot of the millennials are arguing that they would take Aaron Rodgers because they never saw Brett Favre play. Mm-hmm. Who would you take if it came to a big game and the guy that you want as your quarterback, your starting quarterback?
I'm taking Aaron Rodgers because he just doesn't turn over the ball like Brett Favre did. Now, I love Brett Favre's attitude. I love his arm. He was a magician out there too. For people that don't remember Brett Favre, I mean, he was a guy that would turn something spectacular out of nothing. And once he got hot, I mean, you couldn't stop him. We're talking about a 3-time MVP, for people who are a little fuzzy on, his accomplishments. However, he was the gunslinger. He was a guy that took a lot of chances. And so, in the fourth quarter of a big game, I'd rather go with Aaron Rodgers. He just makes me feel a lot more at ease, with the Packers. And if they have to come back from behind, I'd rather have Aaron Rodgers running the show.
Do you think the era made a big difference in terms of Brett Favre's style of play versus Aaron Rodgers' style of play, especially with the analytics now? Do you think that made a difference, and you think there would have been less turnovers if Favre played in today's game?
No, not really, just because that's who just Brett Favre was. It's part of his personality. He's a, back in the day, he was a party animal. He was a gregarious guy, somebody that if you ever interview him, he just, you can't get him to shut up, so that's just part of, he's just a wild and crazy guy, and that's the way he played. That was a reflection of his personality. Whereas Aaron Rodgers is more cerebral, and, he's somebody who does a lot more studying. He's a guy that is more careful. But yeah, when he has to let it loose, he will. But, you watch Aaron Rodgers when he plays, a lot of times there are throws out there. There are guys open, and he just doesn't want to throw the ball for like that 3-yard gain because it's like, I'm just going to play for another down. I don't like it. I know Aaron Jones is open for that 4-yard pass, but, I'm just going to throw it out of bounds because I just don't like it, So they're just two completely different players, different personalities. And I think the way they played was a reflection, or in Rodgers' case, is a reflection of his personality.
If you're a Packers fan and you want to read Ralph's stories, all you have to do is go to packtothefuture.com or packerstalk.com. Ralph, why don't you tell all the fans how they can find you on social media?
Absolutely. So if you're on Twitter, just look me up at Reverend Ralph. That's at Reverend Ralph on Twitter.
Ralph, thank you for joining us. And if there is an NFL season, and I believe there will be, we would love to get you on and talk some Packers football.
Hey, man, I would love to come on again.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ralph, for joining us.
Take care, guys.